The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in room 237 of Washington High School as Zuri Matthews stood at the front of the class, her presentation materials neatly arranged on the podium. Her research on African American contributions to the civil rights movement was meticulously prepared, with primary sources and contemporary parallels that had taken weeks to compile. The classroom walls were lined with generic motivational posters and past student projects, none of which reflected the diversity of the student body. As Zuri began her presentation, her voice clear and confident, Mrs. Bethany Wilson's lips tightened into a thin line. The teacher's fingers drummed against her desk, a habit her students had learned to recognize as a warning sign. Zuri had just reached her second slide when Mrs. Bethany's sharp voice cut through the air. "Miss Matthews, while your topic selection is interesting, I find your appearance rather distracting." Mrs. Bethany's voice carried that particular tone of false concern that made students' stomachs clench. "Those cornrows of yours are hardly appropriate for a formal presentation. How do you expect to be taken seriously in an academic setting?" The classroom fell silent. 27 pairs of eyes darted between Zuri and Mrs. Bethany. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others poorly concealed their snickers behind their hands. The projector hummed in the background, casting Zuri's carefully crafted slides onto the whiteboard behind her. A wave of heat crept up Zuri's neck. The confidence that had fueled her preparation crumbled as she became acutely aware of every eye in the room. The index cards in her hands trembled slightly. The same hairstyle she'd worn proudly that morning, the one her mother had spent hours crafting over the weekend, suddenly felt like a target on her head. Near the back of the classroom, Mia Rodriguez straightened in her seat, her expression hardening as she watched her best friend endure this public humiliation. She'd seen that look on Zuri's face before, the careful mask of composure struggling to stay in place while something broke behind her eyes. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, Zuri attempted to continue her presentation. Her voice, now slightly less steady, pushed forward through her prepared remarks. Mrs. Bethany's interruptions continued, each comment more pointed than the last, focusing on everything except the actual content of Zuri's work. When the bell finally rang, Zuri gathered her materials with mechanical movements, her usual grace replaced by rigid efficiency. As other students filed out, some throwing sympathetic glances her way while others whispered among themselves, Mia remained behind. The two friends met in the relative privacy of the empty hallway, ducking into the alcove near the water fountains. Zuri's composure finally cracked. "I can't believe she did that," she whispered, her voice thick with anger and hurt. "I spent so much time on this presentation, and all she could focus on was my hair." Mia leaned against the wall, her face set in determination. "This isn't just about today," she said firmly. "Remember when she made those comments about Jorge's accent? Or when she suggested Amy's traditional Chinese dress was costume-like during International Day?" The girls exchanged knowing looks as they began to recognize a pattern they could no longer ignore. The hallway gradually emptied as students headed to their next classes, but Zuri and Mia remained in their corner, the seeds of resistance taking root in their conversation. "We need to do something," Mia declared, pulling out her phone to document what had happened. "This can't keep happening to other students." Zuri nodded, her initial humiliation transforming into resolve. What neither girl knew yet was that this moment would spark a movement that would shake their school's foundations and force long overdue conversations about respect, identity, and equality in education. Later that evening, Bethany Wilson sat in her living room, a half-empty glass of wine on the coffee table beside her ungraded papers. Her colleague and longtime friend, David Pierce, lounged in the armchair across from her, nodding approvingly as she recounted the day's events. "You can't let standards slip, Beth," David said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "These kids need to learn how the real world works. Professional appearance matters." But as he spoke, Bethany found herself replaying the moment in her classroom, seeing Zuri's face in her mind. Something about the girl's expression nagged at her conscience. "I've always believed in maintaining high standards," Bethany replied, but her voice carried a note of uncertainty she hadn't expected. She thought about her 20 years of teaching, her reputation for being tough but fair. When had maintaining standards become synonymous with policing students' cultural expressions? The question made her uncomfortable. Meanwhile, across town at the Moonlight Cafe, Zuri and Mia had gathered with a group of students who'd heard about the incident. The cafe's warm lighting and mismatched furniture created a safe space away from school grounds. Around the large corner table sat Jorge Martinez, who dealt with comments about his accent, Amy Chen, still stinging from the International Day incident, and several others who'd experienced similar treatment. It's not just Bethany, Amy said, stirring her untouched chai latte. It's the whole system. Remember when they tried to ban Marcus from wearing his dashiki for the yearbook photo? Marcus, a senior, nodded grimly from his spot near the window. Zuri pulled out her laptop, opening a blank document. We need to document everything, she said, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Every incident, every comment, every time they've tried to erase our cultures. The group began sharing their stories, each account adding to a pattern that could no longer be dismissed as isolated incidents. Mia, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly sat up straighter. The parent-teacher conference is coming up in 2 weeks, she said, her eyes bright with purpose. What if we did more than just complain? What if we showed them something they couldn't ignore? The idea took root quickly. Students began brainstorming, their voices overlapping with growing excitement. They envisioned a presentation that would combine personal testimonies with statistics about diversity and academic success. They planned to showcase how cultural expression enhanced rather than detracted from the learning environment. We could invite student leaders from other schools, Jorge suggested, his usual hesitancy forgotten in the enthusiasm of planning. Show them this isn't just about our school, it's happening everywhere. As the evening progressed, their plan took shape. They would create a multimedia presentation for the parent-teacher conference, combining video testimonials, research data, and live speakers. Each student took on specific responsibilities. Amy would handle the visual design, Marcus agreed to coordinate with other schools, and Jorge would work on gathering statistical data. The energy in the cafe was electric, but underneath the excitement ran a current of anxiety. They all understood the risks of speaking out. Would their grades suffer? Would they face retaliation? Would their parents support them? My mom always says that change doesn't come from being quiet, Zuri said, addressing the unspoken fears. We're not doing anything wrong by asking to be respected. The others nodded, drawing strength from her conviction. By closing time, they had created a detailed action plan and a group chat for coordination. As they gathered their things to leave, the cafe owner, who had been quietly observing throughout the evening, approached their table. You can use this space for your meetings, she offered. Some battles need a headquarters. The students left the cafe that evening with a sense of purpose none of them had felt before. What had started as a response to one teacher's discriminatory behavior was evolving into something larger, a movement for lasting change in their school's culture. None of them could have predicted how their actions would soon intersect with forces beyond the school's walls, or how their small rebellion would catch the attention of someone with the power to make real change happen. Friday morning arrived with a nervous energy coursing through Zuri's bedroom as she prepared for the parent-teacher conference. Standing before her mirror, she adjusted her freshly maintained cornrows, each braid tight and precise, a silent statement of defiance. Her hand smoothed down her carefully chosen outfit, a professional blazer that complemented her school uniform, borrowed from her father's closet of legal wear. The weight of responsibility pressed against her shoulders. In her desk drawer lay a folder containing dozens of testimonials from students, each story documenting instances of cultural dismissal and discrimination. She hadn't told anyone, not even Mia, about the sleepless nights she'd spent organizing these accounts, ensuring each voice would be heard. You don't have to carry this alone, her father had said at breakfast, his judicial demeanor softened by parental concern. But Zuri knew differently. As the daughter of Judge Marcus Carter, she'd grown up understanding the delicate balance between privilege and responsibility. She'd intentionally kept her father's identity quiet at school, wanting to succeed or fail on her own merits. Across town, Bethany's morning routine was interrupted by the sharp ring of her phone. The number wasn't familiar, but the voice that answered her hesitant hello sent a chill down her spine. Mrs. Wilson. This is Judge Carter. The voice was measured, professional, but carried an unmistakable weight of authority. I understand there have been some concerning incidents in your classroom involving cultural discrimination. Bethany's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. Judge Carter, the same Judge Carter whose decisions on civil rights cases had made headlines. The same Judge Carter who sat on the state's Judicial Review Board. I wasn't aware this was a matter requiring judicial attention, Bethany managed to say, her free hand gripping the edge of her kitchen counter. It's not. Yet. The pause that followed spoke volumes. However, As both a member of the judicial system and a parent, I have a vested interest in ensuring our educational institutions maintain an environment of cultural respect and inclusion. The implications of his words slowly sank in. Parent. Vested interest. Bethany's mind raced back through her interactions with Zuri Matthews, Zuri Carter, and the blood drained from her face as she realized the magnitude of her actions. I trust you'll be attending tonight's parent-teacher conference. Judge Carter's question wasn't really a question. Yes, of course, Bethany replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Excellent. I look forward to a productive discussion about implementing positive changes in your classroom environment. The line went dead, leaving Bethany staring at her phone in stunned silence. Meanwhile, in the school's auditorium, Zuri and Mia were doing a final sound check for their presentation. The space would soon be filled with parents, teachers, and administrators. Screens displayed powerful images of students from diverse backgrounds, their stories ready to be shared. Everything okay? Mia asked, noticing Zuri's distraction. You seem more nervous than usual. Zuri nodded, checking her phone for the 15th time that morning. Just want everything to be perfect, she said, avoiding eye contact. She hadn't told Mia about her father's call to Bethany, wasn't sure how her friend would react to learning about her connection to Judge Carter. The truth was, Zuri felt conflicted. She'd wanted to fight this battle on her own terms, to create change through the power of student solidarity rather than parental intervention. But as she watched more students arrive for final preparations, their faces filled with hope and determination, she realized that sometimes change required pushing every available button. The morning light streamed through the auditorium's high windows, casting long shadows across the stage where soon she would stand and speak truth to power. What no one in the room yet realized was that power had already begun to shift, like tectonic plates before an earthquake, and the aftershocks would reshape their entire school community. The auditorium hummed with energy as students filed in for the awareness event. What had started as a response to one incident had grown into something larger.